So everyone
Okay,
can see my
we're
screen correctly, or correct?
yes, looks great. Thank you.
All right. There we go. And so this slideshow I'm about to give you just kind of touches on optimizing images for the web. And the template I used has a lot of outdoor pictures, and I didn't update them. So don't be thrown off by the mixture of hiking and wilderness photos in this optimizing images for the web PowerPoint presentation. And so when we're talking about optimizing images for the web, what are we even talking about? Well, it's a combination of things. It's the image size, format, and how it's described to the web, to search engines, to browsers as well. And what affects image optimization for the web? A bunch of things. Some of these terms here, I just want to touch on them, but this was probably the most technical part of the discussion. So compression is huge when it comes to optimizing images for the web. The two main types of compression are lossy and lossless, and you can just remember them by one sacrifices quality for size and the other sacrifices size for quality. Dimensions also impact the optimization of an image, how fast it's loaded. Metadata that's part of the image that's not visible impacts the overall size. A lot of it's useless for the web. And then the file types themselves impact the optimization, and they go right hand in hand with the compression type. You can see that I've bolded which ones are lossy and which ones are lossless, and I've grayed out SVG and the more modern types, AVIF and WebP, because the latter of those, AVIF and WebP, can be either lossy or lossless. They're more modern types that are easier on cellular data. And SVG is actually a collection of points that represent shapes and colors and information like that. So it's neither lossy or lossless. So why does any of this matter? I think it's hard to describe why it matters because traditionally it matters a lot. But as you can see by my subtitle, the web is weird right now. So the biggest reason why it matters is performance. Images are um, often the largest resources being served on a web page, not just the images used for the content, but the images used for the graphics. It used to be icons and things like that. Not so much anymore, but still, um, all the background graphics, all the transparent um, gradients that you used to see and that you still see sometimes all over the web are all images. So each one of these images that's loaded by a website is a separate resource request. So if you were to go look at the resources being loaded by the network, as you're viewing web pages, you'll see not just the scripts and styles and HTML documents being loaded, but you'll see requests going out for each of the images. So more images means more requests and a longer page load time. And yeah, so an example of this, I wanted to talk about the NINA Library Arts Photo Console contest. With this contest that NINA hosted, they received 59 valid submissions that were unoptimized. Photos from people's cameras or from their phone cameras. Some people tried to post-process them in Photoshop, things like that. But either way, all of them together totaled 159 megabytes. So I went through and optimized each one, got the collection down to 19 megabytes. And the reason this is a good example is because every single image that was submitted for this contest was loaded on a single page as a masonry layout. So that meant if these images weren't optimized by somebody and just taken from the submitted contest form right to the web page, it would be 159 megabyte download for a user to go and try to look at the results of this contest on this page. So as that's insane. And that's why it's important. It's less important when there's only one or two images on a page, but you can see where it quickly gets out of hand. And so just to keep talking about that, the why doesn't matter. On high-speed internet connections like we have inside the libraries and I have at home finally, and you can get in a lot of cities on cellular data through 5G and stuff. It seems like it doesn't matter. Even my own, even as a web developer, I've kind of moved away from optimizing images as thoroughly as I would have in the past because it just seems like things are loading fast, even when they're unoptimized, until you get onto a poor internet connection out in a rural community somewhere, or if you're traveling and you don't have a good 5G connection and you're back to 4G, or God forbid something worse than that, then you start to see the impact that images have on people browsing your website. Just a side note that depending on how the site is developed or the plugins and how they're developed, web pages can be waiting for images to load before they move on to the next portion of the page or displaying the next piece of content as well. And so you can see that where that would be a huge issue for a bunch of unoptimized images loading on a page. And so when it comes to optimizing images, you can spend a lot of time um, doing it, or you can kind of do the bare minimum. But what I want to do um, now is talk about or arm you with the knowledge to um, incorporate these optimization techniques into your own process, whatever it may be. So, Facebook, for example, if you're creating content for just to post on Facebook, does that need to be optimized as much? Do you need to worry about it? Not really, because Facebook is already not necessarily optimizing it, but when you upload a large image to Facebook, they create a bunch of smaller images, and then their system is determining which is the best image based on the size of the screen. And so they're optimizing it that way. And then as you click through and see, get to the full size image, you get that. WordPress websites restrict the size of images you can upload already, but that doesn't add much optimization. And the Drupal websites, it's like no man's land, the Wild West. Anyone can do anything. You can upload massive images if you want. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. So as I talk about the techniques on how to optimize images for the web, do with it what you will, is what I'm trying to say. Now what? Now that I've talked a little bit about what image optimization is. Really, it's about the balance of file size versus the quality of the image. This is the big one because it relates directly to Canva and what I see with a lot of Canva users. Canva defaults to PNG. It's the suggested thing. And yet it's horrible for images that don't need transparency. PNG is a lossless type of image format, which means all of the data inside the image is retained. And so while I'm sharing my screen, I'm going to jump over and break away for example, or break away and show you an example exactly what I mean. This image, if everyone can see this, the upcoming library programs for Wautoma Public Library. Please stop me if you can. This image was created in Canva, uploaded to the website, straight as it was downloaded from Canva. That image is almost 3 megabytes in size. And so Wautoma, they have a lot of artwork that fits this description where it's a collection of upcoming library programs with some graphics in it, but it can be optimized to be way less than 3 megabytes. And you can see this exact same image as a JPEG. It's less than a megabyte. There's almost no visible loss of data that the human eye would perceive until you start to get really down into the blending of the colors and the pixels. And then just for an example of the different formats, I output another example as a GIF. to show you that this version 2 is it's less than a megabyte. And yet you really can't see any difference between the PNG, JPEG versions until you start to get really down into the nitty gritty and how it blends the colors together in the shadows and whatnot. And so another example of this fall forest, Wisconsin picture is almost 30 megabytes, full color. It's just a massive image containing a ton of information. The JPEG version, much, much smaller. 5 megabytes, but still massive in terms of resolution, almost 6,000 pixels. And so all these are just examples of why the format you choose is important when it comes to optimizing images. Because to the human eye, the information that's lost when it's being optimized isn't really being picked up anyway. And so by having those large images on there, there's really no benefit to the user. And so what I would say is almost anything should be a JPEG unless you need transparency. If you're doing a graphic that has gradient background and you want to include transparency, if you have the premium version of Canva, then that's where a PNG comes in handy, or comes in handy. But 9 out of 10 times, a JPEG is going to be the more optimized, best option for putting on your website or on Facebook or anywhere on the web. Something I did want to talk about just because I thought it was neat was that with PNG, since it's a lossless format and all the data is preserved, that there are some instances where even reducing the size of a PNG can make it a larger file size, because as the colors are combined, as the image resolution gets smaller, that creates more data. So yeah, GIF and SVG, I'm not really going to talk about them much. I'll talk about GIF more than SVG, but most people won't come across them. It used to be a battle between GIF and PNG for transparency, because GIF also supports transparency, but it can't do any sort of blending where things are partially transparent. So to have a transparent GIF, you would often have to have some sort of matte color, and you would see all these broken speckles of pixels where the color would be blending with the background. Places like Canva don't even let you choose that option anymore unless you're doing like a animated GIF. And then SVG, like I talked about, it's just a collection of numbers really that define points that make up shapes, and then color data associated with that. And so the pro of that, if you do end up using like doing some sort of clip art style graphics in Canva and you can do an SVG, they're incredibly sharp on every screen size. They can be scaled to infinite dimensions. So they are useful, but just not as much in a web world when it comes to uploading graphics to your website. So yeah, back to the presentation. What else can you do to make sure your images are optimized besides just making sure you're picking the appropriate format? Making sure they're sized appropriately. The examples that I showed previously from Watoma and of the fall in Wisconsin, the Watoma one was 2,000 pixels wide. And even though that's not much larger than what I would recommend for the max length, it still is larger. And I noticed that Canva is like defaulting to a relatively large 1960 or something like that default. If it doesn't need to be that large, then don't make it that large, because smaller dimensions often equal smaller file size. Something just to be aware of as you're saving images. All right, so picking the format, picking the file size correctly, that's all fine and dandy for a single image, but what if you have a ton of images? What if you have 100 images from a contest that your library put together and that everyone submitted to you via email or through a form on the website? How can you bulk optimize? Well, there are a ton of free resources, some of which that I've used personally, for like the Nina project, where you can just upload a large collection of images. Some of them limit how many you can do at a time, but then, you know, set the optimization parameters and go. And as an example, I'll show you. So here's a bunch of the unprocessed ones from Nina. You can see that some of these images are small. Somebody already optimized this. Some of them are very relatively large, I'd say. Oh, it says I'm offline. But yeah, once it's done, it gives me options on how much I want to compress them. If I'm shooting for a particular file size or ratio reduction. And then it just lets you download the collection. So if you're aware of it and it's something you know want to incorporate into your process as you're generating graphics for your website or for Facebook, there are a lot of tools out there that'll help you. Beyond just the format and the image itself, optimizing images also involves search engine optimization. You can't do a lot in terms of optimizing your images for search engines, but what you can do is name them things that make sense for the context that they're used in, such as my example. And when you're presented with the opportunity to add an alt tag or a description to an image, make that descriptive of what the image is and what its place is in the context of the content. That's all picked up by search engines, helps them understand what the images are so that they can give people better results. Um, yeah. So yeah, the recap and Q&A. The most important thing is that optimizing images can directly impact the performance of your website, but your mileage may vary. So that's why I want to stress that incorporate it into your process as you see fit. Primarily, maybe when you're downloading images from Canva, or if you're dealing with bulk images. But I wouldn't stress about it as much as I would have said to stress about it like 6 years ago or something. And so with that, I'll open the floor to questions.